The first time I saw her was in this place that looked like paradise. A golden meadow with gurgling brooks gleaming under the sun. There she was, seated gracefully, bathed in nature's chiaroscuro, like a figure in a Renaissance painting. It was a springtime picnic, and we were there as friends of a friend. She said her name was Noor, and I noticed in her hands a little diary. Sketches or poems, I asked, at which she looked into my eyes, seeking something, before letting me in on her secret. The pages of her diary were filled with a myriad of rich, intricate sketches of avian life, speckled with words and botanical motifs. And as she turned page after page, her face aglow talking about her feathery friends, I couldn't help but notice her hands. Small and delicate, smooth and soft. There was a subtle strength in the grace of her movements. On my drive back to the city that day, I realized something had changed. There was this new light that had made its way into the labyrinth of my mind that would go on to illuminate every thought in the weeks to come.
After a month and 21 days, I was finally going to meet Joy. What an apt name for Joy is what I experience a magical, radiant warmth every time we connect. He had called a week ago saying that he would be visiting my city for a 3-day conference. I told him, try and squeeze in another day so I can show you my favorite spots in town. Summer for me that year was a good whole 18 hours that we spent in a blur. Where do I begin? How we walked the promenade with Dali-esque, melting ice creams in hand, minutes later escaping into the cool marble interiors of the museum. I learned a new word that day, sfumato, a painting technique that makes contours appear soft and blurred. And such is what happened to the platonic bearings of our friendship. As we sat inches away from each other, spinning in a merry carousel, where amidst the blur of carnival lights, we held a gaze deep and unbroken, one that made no attempt at masquerading our racing hearts. When it was time to say goodbye, something unusual happened. The first summer rain. I knew right then that our lives would be entwined forever. The two of us, warp and weft, a rich tapestry waiting to be formed.
In July that year, Noor invited me to a backpacking trip somewhere in the Far East. The place we were visiting usually experiences peak summer during that time. So imagine our surprise when we caught ourselves in the middle of a typhoon. 3 days of being stuck indoors, experiencing the world outside through translucent and diffused window views. But the situation had only brought us closer to a moment, the possibility of which we had already imagined. The torrent of rain outside became a mist-laden dance between the earth and the sky. A sweet symphony compiled by Mother Nature, complete with flashes of brilliance and thunderous applause. her hands in mine and mine in hers. It was the purest form of intimacy, like a halo kindled from the very core. We became two familiar particles in this infinite cosmos, suspended in the same wavelength of energy, thought, and emotion. The after moments and the days that followed proved to be phosphorescent in evoking memories of all that had transpired.
Fireflies are best seen and left in their natural habitat. Yet we capture them in fancy bottles and jars to be, what, entertained? The more I think about it, the more I seek to understand. Why does love entail feelings of wanting to keep people close to oneself? In my mind, it was possible for two people to be in love, even if they lived on either side of the equator. To Joy, though, it just didn't make sense. He laughed when I told him that me moving to his city would mean leaving behind beautiful boulevards, parks, and fountains for a world of cold and imposing concrete and in-your-face neon lights. These should be the least of our concerns, he said. That was the first time I sensed a drift. That what I had willingly embraced was now an entanglement. That somewhere, somehow, the warp and the weft were not aligned. It was beautiful while it lasted, this bond that we shared. But along the way, like the very light that we brought into each other's lives, we dispersed, leaving loosened memories behind.
Years later, I found myself in Paris, scouting for a good neighborhood to set up an office. It was 3 degrees Celsius, but the warm, roseate sky above spoke a different story. Over 1,000 birds singing their vesper, engaged in a hypnotic flight pattern. Later that evening, a few pegs down, I walked out of a bar, my eyes manifesting beautiful bouquets and blurs out of the city lights. I soon found myself on a quaint cobbled street filled with cafes, galleries, and boutiques, an endless row of Parisian charm. A bookstore caught my attention. It was the most brightly lit and had signage fashioned in a nature-inspired hand-drawn font. I was somehow strangely familiar with the design. The sinuous details, the rise and fall of the curves, I knew I had to check it out. I froze. Seated behind the counter was Noor, who also instantly recognized me. As I fell on my knees, she stood up shakily on hers, and then we hugged. I now realize that I was always destined to visit that bookstore. That, yes, we were apart, but interwoven in my years throughout was this journey of me consciously following my light, the light I call Noor.